Welcome to Careful Consideration of Our Common Concerns. I'm Dr. Ted Noel. This is going to be a very quick run through of what Trump's legal team presented yesterday in roughly an hour and a half. I want to hit just the high points, and I'm going to comment that I have already seen more detailed discussions of almost all of the evidence and agree that the case is solid. But once again, courts are going to have to make the decisions on what happens, not me. And I will only make one big prediction. It will go to the Supreme Court. And in going there, the Trump will take every effort to avoid looking political. And I'll get there in just a minute. We're going to do this very quickly. Any lawsuit has to meet several thresholds. First, it has to demonstrate that there was fraud. I think we can do that pretty easily. Second, it must demonstrate that it was material. That is, if there was a 100,000 vote margin, we have to demonstrate there was at least 100,000 votes that were fraudulent. And this apparently looks pretty easy to prove, but we're going to have to actually prove it in court. Then you go ask what the relief is. And the relief that would be asked, I think, is that the court will enjoin the states from certifying the electors. And that would say that, for example, Pennsylvania could not send its 20 electors to vote for president, and so their votes would simply not exist. And if this were to happen in all of the contested states, nobody would get 270 votes. And then the non-political answer by the Supreme Court would be, we're going to send it to the political body, which is designed by Article 2, Section 1, and the 12th Amendment to actually do the decision, and that's the House of Representatives, where Nancy Pelosi in this case doesn't actually have a majority. What will happen is each state gets one vote, and since Republicans control over 26 states, Republicans will win and Donald Trump will be reelected. But that depends on actually winning the case at the court and getting that result. And I can't tell you that that's what's going to happen. Now, we have several problems here. One of the first ones is Dominion Software. This is the software that built, or the company that built the voting machines, runs a software that was in 26 or 27 states and in all of the contested states. Now, this software was designed for Hugo Chavez after he had an election scare in Venezuela. It's easy to hack. It's been done multiple times. The ways to hack it are published, and it has a number of what are called backdoors. Now, a backdoor is simply a software key that says, I'm the system operator. I can log in. You won't see it on the other side, and I'll go in and I'll do things that I think need to be done or I want to do. And it is specifically designed so that the backdoor can be used to change votes. This is how Hugo Chavez and later on Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela have managed to never lose an election. Because, as the Russians have pointed out, it doesn't matter who votes, it's who counts the votes that matters. Now, statistical analysis and code searches have found switched votes, and there are a number of those. I won't go into the details. And what we do know is, for example, the state of Texas looked at this and said, we will not certify Dominion Software voting machines because of all of these problems. Now, the next item is something called ballot dumping. Now, the obvious stuff is to look here at Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. They all quit counting at midnight. Okay? And they all restarted around 4 a.m. And what happened? Now, first of all states have staff and they're paid to continue this through the night until they get done. So it's unprecedented to have the stops. But then you had the 6 contested states: Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Oh, I listed Pennsylvania twice, never mind. And Nevada. Arizona is the one I'm missing. They all quit counting at midnight. So let me change this here, and we will go. Now the graphic is correct. They quit counting at midnight. And as a result, you say, why did they all stop at the same time? That is nationwide coordination of ballot fraud. There's no question about it. Then they all restarted somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 a.m. And when they restarted, all of a sudden you have what are called ballot dumps. The count suddenly goes up in one state by 136,000 votes for Biden without one vote for Trump. That is simply impossible. And what really this says is they thought they were going to win by having dead people vote and a few other things. It's going to be close. You know, all of their polling said 14% for Biden, and we'll just kind of pad it a little. And when they discovered they had some real problems, I will guarantee you there were some phone calls that went around, and all of the states stopped all of a sudden at midnight and restarted almost at the same time. What that means is that they had to have system operators go in through the back doors, make the changes, and say, oh, we're going to start counting, and boom, instantly you see these differences. Doing it that way requires coordination. Now, there were other things that they did. They instructed ballot tabulators to accept faulty ballots. Now, these are employed poll workers, and they're told to accept mail-in ballots without signature matching. Mail-in ballots are more Democrat than Republican, so we get all of those. But it is based, for example, in Pennsylvania, it's based on court action, where the court gave time to take ballots after Election Day, where it said you don't have to do the matching. Guess what? Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution says that the legislature has plenary authority. It doesn't use the word plenary, but the courts have interpreted it as plenary. It says that the legislature sets the rules unless it's been modified by the U.S. Congress. Well, the legislature in Pennsylvania set a set of rules. The governor didn't like it, went to the court. The court said, oh, we'll change it. Guess what? He's not allowed to do that. The court's not allowed to do that. So when the court overturned the Trump suit, guess what? It's the same biased court that has violated the rules. In Georgia, there was a consent decree where the governor said, well, we will make these changes to what goes on. Guess what? He's not allowed to do it. He doesn't have the authority. Only the legislature can make that. And so all of the changes on ballot signature matching that made it so difficult to check in Georgia and just said don't bother in Pennsylvania, those were illegal changes. And this allows fraudulent ballot dumps. How many times have we heard the reports of, well, they pulled up with trucks full of ballots or cars full of ballots, and all of a sudden you get all these extra ballots? Let's go one other point. This is a big deal. Monitor exclusion. Remember, we have election monitors, and by law in every state, you are allowed to have a monitor from every party at every poll counting station, every vote counting station. Well, we know, for example, that the Republican monitors were pushed a long way away from it to where they could no longer have meaningful observation. And in Detroit, they went even further. There were windows in the room where it was being counted. They put cardboard up over the windows so nobody could film from outside. What were they hiding? Let's go a little further. We know that they were hiding fraudulent absentee ballots. People got ballots they didn't request, and people got multiple absentee ballots. There were ballots sent to dead people. There were ballots sent to non-residents, people who had moved away to another state. And then there were a number of people who came in to vote in person, and they were told they had already voted by absentee. Oh, really? So This was a way to cheat by mail, as Trump put it. And then, of course, we've talked about ballot dumps. We know, for example, in Georgia that there were large numbers of ballots that arrived to be counted that looked like they had been printed up with the votes in place. And they weren't even creased as if they would have been put into a mailer. There were no changes. I mean, every vote was all of the same, exactly the same. No squiggles. You write with a pen, and there were no squiggles where the pen ran over the line a little bit or anything. None of that. These were clearly fraudulent ballot dumps. And of course, we know the story about dead voters. We know that thousands were verified dead. There were many absentees with provisional ballots with a January 1, 1900 birthday. Guess what? There aren't any people 120 years old. Now, the dead ones, 12,000 votes isn't enough to overcome 120,000, but it's another way things get done. So let's really add this up. And let's actually go back to the beginning of it and consider what has to be done. We have to look at, was there fraud? If there is fraud, then the vote is irreparably tainted. That means you can't fix the taint. It's there. And that means you cannot have a valid election. If the taint is bad enough that it was enough votes that it could have swung the election, then it is material, and at that point, the Supreme Court may very well enjoin those states from certifying votes. And if that is the case, the vote then goes to the House of Representatives. This has been a quickie. I'm not going to tell you what will happen. I am hoping that once it gets to the Supreme Court, they will enjoin those votes because the votes are completely fraudulent. It will go to the House of Representatives. Trump would be reelected. But let's make one thing clear. Nobody's going to be happy. Well, half of the country will be unhappy. And hopefully it's the Democrats. But of course, they're already burning down cities. And if they riot and do it more, count on it, Trump will call out the National Guard, employ the Anti-Insurrection Act, and will shut the violence down. And of course, for that, he'll be called a dictator and a Nazi, but what else is new? Until next time, take a look at those links below. Join me on MeWe or on Parler, the new non-censoring, non-tracking versions of Facebook and Twitter. But if you must use the old left-wing censoring versions, we're still on Facebook and at VidZet on Twitter. The message is what matters. I'm Dr. Ted Noel. Thanks for watching.